Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, I'm basically going to be explaining and showing you guys how to use loops in Kotlin. And more specifically in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to use the for loop. In my opinion, one of the best loops that you can use. So let's actually create a new class, a new Kotlin class, and let's call this for loop. Now, you guys might be asking yourself, let me just create this function. Function main args using the array string, and you might be asking yourself, what is a loop? Well, a loop is basically used in programming languages to run a certain part or section of the program a certain amount of times under certain conditions. Now this may sound quite confusing, but look at it this way. Let's say you wanted to write a program that would display something like your name 5 times. Well, that's basically a loop. You utilize a loop in that fashion. But you guys might also be saying, well, I can easily do that by just print and writing my name right here, and by just copying this, I can just basically just duplicate this 5 times, right? But in theory, if I were to just do this 3 times, indeed it would print out my name 3 times. But in programming, this is not considered good programming and is not very efficient for the compiler, and your program will not be efficient because it's basically going through each step, and just going through all of that while it could have done it in a single line. So as I said, we're going to be looking at the for loop. Now, for loop is very, very simple to understand. In fact, if you're familiar with other object-oriented programming languages, you already know how loops work. But for those of you who don't, it's very simple. So you basically start with a for, all right? And you open the brackets and you basically create a variable. You don't have to use the var or the var abbreviation. You just have to give the variable name. So I'm going to call the variable number. All right, and then I want to use the in. All right, we basically I'll explain what that means. You then want to give a range. All right, basically when using a range, this is basically a range from let's say a range from 1 to 10. So let's actually use a range. So you use 1 and 2 dots to 10. That basically means you're giving a range of numbers from 1 to 10. Ideally, this would make sense if you use it from 0, because in programming languages, the first number starts from 0, right? So now we then have to create 2 curly braces to basically initiate the for loop. Now you might be asking yourself, well, what exactly are we doing? Well, this program basically, I'm just going to print out the numbers 0 to 10 automatically. So all I have to do now is say print, right? And I just have to say, for example, number. All right, and if I basically write that, it's basically going to print all the numbers from 0 to 10. And to show you that, I'm just going to hit save. I'm just going to save that, and I'm just going to run the program. All right, and let's see what we get. It should be quite a fun, interesting result. And it's good, as you can see, it's printed them, but it's printed them in a horizontal, and that's because it's printed them on the same line. That's because we didn't use the print line command. So let's actually run that again. Indeed, it did work, but we want them to be printed vertically on their own separate lines. And there we have it. So it's basically printed the numbers 0 to 10. And you can basically increase this to whatever you want using the range. Let's say I wanted to display numbers up to 100,000 or a million. We can run this, and indeed it's going to actually calculate that. And you'll see, instead of basically printing out, as you can see, it's still calculating, and wow, that's pretty. It ran actually quite fast, and you can see all the way it printed all of those numbers in a matter of 2 seconds. Very, very quick. And if you can imagine, if you would have actually had to do this manually. So that's really the beauty of loops, and more specifically the for loop. So let's actually summarize what we've done. We've created a for loop. We've created a number and the data type. We then give a range. Basically, we then opened the curly braces to initialize the loop, and then we printed out this variable because it's already going through this range. It's as simple as that, and there you have it. It's going to print out all the numbers from 0 to 100,000. So that's basically it for this video, guys. If you have any questions, just let me know in the Q&A section of the course. Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we're basically going to be discussing the while loop. This is the second type of loop. It's not my favorite, but it's also very important that you guys learn and basically understand and learn how to use it. So let's create a new Kotlin class and let's call it the while loop. All right. So let me just create that and let me quickly. You guys should already be pretty used to typing this function out, I bet right now. Args array string, and let's open that up like so. All right, so we're talking about the while loop. Now the while loop is pretty similar to the for loop, except it has a lot of additional steps that you have to take to basically do the same thing. That's why I prefer the for loop. But let's say we were going to run the same program we did in the while loop. We're basically going to create a program that will display the numbers 1 to 10 automatically. How would we go about this? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a variable that will act as a counter. All right, so let's create a variable and let's call it counter. All right, now this counter is going to have a value of 1. Basically, it's just holding the value of 1 because we will need this variable as we're creating this loop. So basically, let's create a while loop. You basically type out while, pretty simple, open up the brackets, and now you basically use the counter and you say while the counter, and here is where you use your range. You basically say while your counter is less than or equal to and the number you want your range. So we're going to be printing numbers from 1 to 10. So while your counter is less than or equal to 1 to 10, I want you to do this. All right, so you open up the two curly braces and now you can basically say print line and you can basically print out counter. All right, now if we run this, you would think that it would print out the numbers 1 to 10. So let's actually try and run this and let's see what we get. It's going to compile. And here we are. And now as you can see, something weird is happening. It's basically, it's just continuing. It's basically printing 1, but it's not stopping. And that's what I was going to explain about loops, is you have to actually have basically what you would call a condition that would end the loop. But in this case, we don't have that condition. All right, because we basically say let me just stop this program. It's just going to continue running like this forever because we have not ended the loop in the program. So the reason it's doing this is because we have created a variable and we've called it counter. Now the counter holds a value of 1. And we have said in this while loop, while the counter is less than or equal to 10, all right, which it already is, print the counter. So it's basically going to print 1, and since it's not being incremented at all, the value is going to remain as 1. So as most of you have already guessed, we need to basically increment it. And how do we do this? Really simple. We use the variable and we just increment it. As you guys must have remembered in previous tutorials, is that you use the increment operator and it increases the value by 1. So what do you think is going to happen? Let's run it and let's see. So let's run it. And there you go. It's going to print everything from 1 to 10. And that's basically what I was trying to put across when talking about the while loop. The while loop requires a lot of steps, but it's also a very good loop to understand how a loop works. So basically, to summarize what we've done in this loop, we created the main function. We created a variable called counter to hold a value of 1. We can change that to 0 if we wanted the numbers to start from there. We then created a while loop saying while the counter is less than or equal to 10, 10 being our range as to how far you want the loop to continue. We then said print counter, print the value of counter, which is 1 at this point. Now when you're printing it, I want you to add, every time you print it, I want you to add 1 to the value of it. So it prints the counter 1 and adds a value. It prints the counter, that's 2, adds value, it becomes 3, and so on and so forth until it reaches 10. And once it reaches 10, it basically goes through this right here and stops the loop. So that's basically how a while loop works and how loops work. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, just let me know in the Q&A section of the course. Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, I'm basically going to be explaining to you the final type of loop, and that is the do while loop. Now, again, you can see it has some kind of relation to the while loop. And you're right, it does. So let's actually get started. I've already created a class because I saw that we're just wasting a bit of time creating a new class every time, but you guys should do the same. So as you guys have already known, it's very similar to the while loop. Also, it's quite similar in terms of its syntax. So basically it starts out very similar to the while loop, where you create a variable, and we're going to use the same concept. We're going to create a counter which is going to have a value of 0 this time. Let's use 0. Okay, and this is basically your starting point. Wherever you want the loop to start at, this is your starting point. So I want mine to start at 0. Now the next thing you do is use the do option, and you create 2 curly braces and open them. All right, now you're going to notice that it's going to give you this little red wiggly line here, and you basically I'm going to show you what that's for in a second. All right, so now in here it's very similar to the while loop. You basically create your print line to print out your counter. So it's going to print out your counter, and you increment it by 1. Okay, now you're still going to get this error here, and that's because you're missing the while section. All right, now while is basically similar to what we did, counter, and you give your range is less than or equal to. This time let's try and print out numbers to 20. All right, so that's a lot to basically take in, but as you can see, it's very similar to the while loop. But let's actually run this and see that it actually prints out numbers from 0 to 20. All right, so let's run that, and there you have it. All right, so it's going to print out numbers from 0 to 20. Now let's look at basically how it works. So we declared a variable, we initialize the variable counter, and we give it a value of 0. So this is basically your starting point. This is your starting point, right? We then opened the do loop, the do while loop, and we basically printed out the counter, and we basically increased the value every time it was going to be printed. We already discussed this in the previous lecture. Now we then gave the condition while to basically perform these 2 things right here, while the counter is less than or equal to 20. So you're basically printing the counter and incrementing it by 1 every time it runs through this loop until the value is less than or equal to 20. So that's basically it in terms of loops. Very simple to understand, and very helpful when it comes to programming. Again, I would highly recommend that you use the for loop because of how easy it is to grasp and to use. You don't have to declare variables outside, and it just makes it a lot simpler to use. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, just let me know in the Q&A section of this video.